Hello, viewers of our Stop the Destruction of the World program. This morning I was reading some news in the newspaper, in one of the best-known papers of São Paulo, in which it mentioned that Pope Benedict XVI was lamenting the fact that humanity is following a very materialistic path and has become overly interested in money, and that science only believes in what can be proven through experimentation. And he laments this because he said that there are many things that belong to the human being's real life that is beyond experimentation, that is removed from science, showing us that this idea exists in the academics and also exists in the Vatican itself. That science and religion are distinct fields which do not integrate. And I think this is a shame, because this notion is still anachronic. And that is, people who should already have a clear understanding that there exists a science, a triological science developed by Norberto Keppe, and that this science makes an integration between the field of experimentation, a field, in fact. It is called New Physics, which was developed by Dr. Keppe by joining the fields of philosophy and theology. And why do I think this is a great shame? Because Keppe's science presents an enormous support, an enormous resource for theologians and philosophers, and can prove their theories and sometimes even change some of their dogmas. I would like to mention here, then, for example, some experiments that science has been doing recently, in which Keppe can explain and Freud can't. But Keppe explains what, for example, doctors at the University Hospital in Geneva, in Switzerland, have been discovering. For example, a 64-year-old woman suffered a vascular cerebral accident and lost the movement in her left arm. She then developed an invisible arm that she can see as being milkish in color and transparent, and that this third arm has functions, and that, for example, can touch some objects and even scratch her right arm. And this woman was analyzed at the hospital. They performed magnetic resonance on her brain, and they were able to see that, in fact, there is an interaction of her brain with this referred to arm. This is the world of energetics that Dr. Keppe describes in his book called The New Physics of Disinverted Metaphysics. Dr. Keppe, please, could you take that book there and show it to our viewers? That this book is called The New Physics of Disinverted Metaphysics. It is a book in which Keppe explains a bunch of similar phenomena that are considered as being transcendental, unexplainable, or miracles through new physics. It wasn't written to deny the existence of the subnatural world or the transcendent, nor to confirm that all of this is a reality. For example, take a look at a photograph that was taken in France in 1992 on the inauguration day of the Stop the Destruction of the World Association. There in the garden of our Château du Tanquier in Paris, you can see that there is a group of people sitting in the garden studying the statutes of the Stop Association. And here we have elements that, in fact, until today belong to the association. This was in 1992. But if you pay attention, you will see that there is a rainbow over the group. In this photograph, you can see it perfectly well, and it only proves that this rainbow was formed in the shape of a type of shell encompassing this group. This is an incredible phenomenon. An 11-year-old boy. He is the son of our secretary, Marco André Sanskowski. He is one of the greatest photographers in Europe. When he was 11 years old, he took this photo, and when it was developed, one could see that it encompassed the group, this energetic, a highly positive vibration that appears in the form of a rainbow. Thus, that tradition that the rainbow is a symbol of the alliance between God and humanity, of the new alliance, of an alliance For what? Because when the human being elevates his vibration and he unites one or two people together to form an energetic field of positive vibration, this kind of thing can show up when photographed and even experienced. Another interesting fact that I would like to present here to our viewers is what happened with Saint Bernadette Soubirous, who received messages from Our Lady of Lourdes in the south of France, where she was canonized. She died when she was 35 years old and very sick, and for the next 46 years after her death, she was unburied 3 times in order to check if her body remained intact and uncorrupted, and still had blood, in fact. And due to this research made through new physics that Kepi made, related to this issue of essential energetics linked to the field of transcendence, our viewers can see the really important relationship between the psychic, the spiritual, and the physical life. Therefore, in this sense, this distance between the spiritual and the physical no longer exists, which can be shown through the research by Dr. Kepi. Take a look at this photograph, how Bernadette presents herself today. Her body is intact and uncorrupted. She is. Look how interesting. Her hair, her nails, including her liver, which is the first to deteriorate normally. It is intact, in fact. And now you will see here that she is inside a glass casket protected in a church in France, and anyone can go visit her and see this phenomenon that would normally not be taken seriously. Ah, this is a miracle. This comes from religion. This is theology. This has nothing to do with science. And it does have everything to do with triological science. And I advert, this is even a warning. And all those who study and are interested in spirituality and theology, pay attention, for there exists a science called the analytical trilogy, which has made this union, and it can supply arguments with a scientific base that prove these theological phenomena that are called spiritual, which they are, but they can be proven also through science.
This that you mentioned in relation to what the Pope had said about the insignificance of modern experimental science. We have been saying this since the beginning of our work, because what they call science, experimental science, would be in the sense of Aristotle and the thinkers. Science is philosophy. It is knowledge. The word science means knowledge. Now, they gave a new meaning to the word science as being experimentation, but it is not. Real experimentation comes from what is done in practice. So what happens? For example, the human being has to verify in practice if what he thinks, if that knowledge that he has can be confirmed or not in practice. So I wrote this book called The Origin of Illness. Here it is here. This book shows where illness comes from where it originates. Now, modern medicine sees these factors more in terms of viruses, bacteria, external factors. And in this book I show that the issue is an internal one. So let's take a look at this chart that I'd like to present to you now.
The trio of illnesses.
Where does neurosis come from? Looking to the left side, the fundamental problem of the human being is the problem of arrogance. So this arrogance that we all have, and that impedes us from knowing what is good and from what is evil as well, generally comes from censorship. Referring back to the chart again, looking in the middle of the chart, censorship is the resistance that a person has toward knowledge. And if a person is unaware of his arrogance, then he will think that this problem of arrogance, of envy, of hatred, is in the other people. So then, looking on the right side, he projects these elements that he doesn't want to see in himself. We project our illnesses onto others, as though the problem comes from them. And so like this, the person never cures himself. Looking at the lower right-hand side, this is the path towards illnesses. So next, I'm going to show you another chart that I've prepared for you related to the present dangers of human civilization. Let's see what I've written. Firstly,
particularization. All the power in the world is in the hands of a select few.
Can you notice that the whole thing of globalization is a lie? It's a seething lie, coming from those in power. When I talk about power, I'm not talking about these little powers of the third world countries, but the power that exists in the countries that dominate humanity, the countries that have the economic power, that have all the money in their hands. They talk about this globalization, but this so-called globalization is really particularization. So, for example, the multinationals. Nowadays, not only do they manufacture cars, machines, etc., but they are buying up land as well in order to dominate agriculture. We know that in Sweden, for example, there are 7 families that dominate the country. In Finland, there are 5 that dominate the entire country. So the world, within a short period of time, will be dominated by half a dozen families. So this particularization is a great danger to society at the moment. Let's now take a look at what happens when these small groups get into power. Let's see in second place.
The results are these unjust laws that only favor those who are in power.
Notice that we no longer follow the Roman human rights, Roman law. In Roman law, the judge normally consults the books of the law, and what the law says is how he will then judge someone. Nowadays, what is applied is individual law. That is, it's the judge himself who judges, especially in the theory of Anglo-Saxon law, the United States, England, and even Germany. So it's the judge who decides the case, whether it's within the law or not. If on that particular day his arthritis is flaring up, he can condemn a person. So, the issue of human law being subject to individual law is very dangerous indeed. It's an enormous danger to our present civilization. Arbitrarily condemn and imprison a person to 10 years, 20 years, or 96 years as they do. It's even a joke. Take a look in third place at what is a danger for civilization.
Let those who are in power be responsible for solving all problems. Note, what needs to be followed is what the people want, and not only what the powerful want.
Because in Roman law, there are codes of law that the judges, barristers, and lawyers need to follow, so that things are not decided based on a spur-of-the-moment opinion, which is truly an absurd situation. In fact, presidents, chancellors, mayors, governors, representatives, and everyone must see to these general laws and work in function of the well-being of the people, and not, as is presently happening, of each one wanting to work for his own good, and even forcing the people to work for them. So, the people vote for their public officials, then these officials go and make laws that benefit only themselves, therefore going against the people who voted for them. And this is very dangerous. Hence, this is data based on experimentation, on science, that each of you can then verify in order to see what is actually taking place. We'll be right back, won't we, Claudia?
Even if we don't have a lot of consciousness, we can perceive that life is divine. We live in transcendence, whether we accept it or not. We still live in an earthly paradise, except we don't accept it. In fact, we attack what is most beautiful, good, and real. Consciousness of our envy and inversion will make it possible for us to return to this paradise we've abandoned. We don't need to build it. We just need to accept it. The Stop the Destruction of the World Association was created to bring about exactly this consciousness. We are working to return the world to goodness. Join us.
So, when I was in the United States, I wrote this book here, alerting everyone about the issue of money speculation. You can see it here. The decay of the American people and of the United States.
Reading this is important so as to prevent this. The book can also be found in Portuguese.
In this book, I show that you cannot place economic power above political power. Neither can you place it above religious power, nor above culture or civilization. And in those days, Reagan, using the ideas of the famous Friedman couple, put economy above the political structure itself. So what happened? The political power, as well as the people themselves, all of society, began to work for the interests of the economic power, therefore working for those who are the economically powerful. Here in the Western world, the capitalist power, and in the Orient, in the old Soviet Union, the Marxist power. So, for a long time now, the people have been exploited by the social economic power, which nowadays they've even managed to subjugate the politicians into following the orientation they give. So, what has been the result of this? Let's see this chart that I've prepared for you.
Consequences of speculation. First, money that is not cash is a wealth that doesn't exist.
And this backing was gold. Up to the Bretton Woods meeting in 1944, if a person wanted to change any quantity of his money for gold, he could change it and the bank would have it. But from this meeting at Bretton Woods onwards, money lost its value. It lost its backing and is now based on the value of what is written on the paper bills, the money itself. Therefore, money without backing is a wealth that doesn't exist. So, if now it's the paper notes that are of value, then it's easy to say that an individual has $1 billion this and $1 billion that. But in reality, he doesn't have this wealth. It's just an enormous illusion. Referring back to the chart now, in second place.
This is a false delirium of a wealth that does not exist.
And thirdly,
this is a type of sociophrenia, a social schizophrenia. Observation. Society can be a victim of its social phrenia in a social psychosis.
I wrote a book entitled Social Pathology. You can see it here. In order to show that society can also become sick. So I've given this condition a name, socialphrenia, or sociophrenia. And what is sociophrenia? It's a society that is entirely schizophrenic. So what is schizophrenia in the individual sense, in the human being? Schizophrenia is an attitude of division of personality of the individual. It's as though he were two different people, one that is more or less normal and the other that is sick. So human society today is sociophrenic. This is a term that I created in order to be able to transmit the idea that society can also become so sick in the same way that an individual can become extremely ill. It can have, on the one hand, for example, incalculable wealth, and on the other hand, terrible poverty and misery. And this is a sick society. On the one hand, there are people who want to develop, who work hard in order to have a comfortable lifestyle. And on the other hand, we have mass poverty that leads to all this thievery and social problems that we experience. Let's see now from where all this that is taking place originates. Where does it come from? Because, as I was saying, Reagan generated an incredible wealth for the United States through all this money speculation, even though it was fictitious. And all the other nations of the so-called First World wanted the same thing. So who controls all this type of activity? Let's see this issue of financing.
Financing is very dangerous. First, the issue of credit that the banks gave is destroying the economic life.
We should say first that banks in themselves have to exist. Where are people going to deposit what they have? In banks. So the defect isn't the existence of banks, but rather it's in the issue of money speculation and the interest rates that banks charge. Because, of course, a bank has to charge for the work that it does, but not to the point of charging interest rates that are so high, like here in Brazil, that they drown everyone in debt. The farmers, industries, entrepreneurs, people who have companies. So consider well. We have an idea that is contrary to what is out there. We at least desire to see small businesses flourishing, many small businesses, and not a few multinational companies that dominate everything. The people have to have their own companies. That is, companies shouldn't exist in order to generate profits for a small group of seemingly lucky people at the top. Well, lucky but sick. They are individuals who are mentally ill. Because people who give so much value to money, whose greatest desire is to make millions, this is something mentally ill. I say this here, and you can confirm this through your own experiences. Especially physicians can attest to this, that people who are millionaires spend their lives constantly consuming medications, being operated on, and having a totally unhappy life. Because the finality of the human being isn't to make money. As is said, nobody is going to take their money with them in their coffins when they die. So then, let's take a look in second place.
Obtaining financing through banks generates profits only for the banks.
It all goes to the banks, and of course to the people who own these banks, this group of bankers. Now let's see now in third place.
Companies lose their capacity of work and production. Consequences. There is an increase in the price of products, and these companies fall into an illusion.
Because we are always actively doing a campaign of goodness, goodness in action. Because a person can only be happy if he is focused and determined on generating well-being for others, and not for oneself. Because people have to bring what is good to society. Society is more important than the individual human being. The human being is only a fraction, an element within the greater society. At its base, the greater society is good because it was created by the divine being. But when the human being rejected the divine being, and he, the human being, turned against society, he then created this hell, that we now live and that you know very well. Now, I'm putting up a chart to show what can disturb our happiness in this life, which is so short. Because if you observe well, a person begins to produce somewhat more reasonably at around 40 years of age, and by 60 he has an incredible capacity for productivity. But at the age of 60, most people are ready to retire. So this is absurd, it's senseless. When an individual is at his best phase, he prepares himself to die. So let's see a new chart that I've made.
What impedes happiness? An excessive interest in food.
This focus on what religious individuals and mystics have to say about fasting and these things in relation to food. It's true, it's not the issue of going without eating, because imbalanced people also don't eat. They don't like food. But it's an issue of moderation. Moderation in relation to what one eats, and eating food that isn't harmful, of course. And if the individual doesn't exercise moderation, he is unable to control himself, and this destroys the body and destroys his life. Let's see, secondly.
An excessive interest in money.
This is the only type of thing that the media talks about, the media of these infamous organizations that are against the people. These organizations that want this little group of only 20% on their side, and the rest of the people, 80%, dying of hunger, of cold, and other such things. Take a look in third place.
An excessive interest in sex. The three elements that society incentivates are all the most dangerous to society itself.
Do you see? Everything that the media talks about, the newspapers, magazines, etc., incentivate these three pathological elements.
So this is the sociophrenia that you were referring to a little while back. We'll be back next program.